Eternal Flame. Chapter 1.
"Don't be too hard on them, Dainty," Geralt said. "They didn't have a chance. A mimic copies so exactly there's no way of distinguishing it from the original. I mean, from its chosen victim. Have you never heard of mimics?"
"Some. I thought it was all fiction."
"Well, it isn't. All a doppler has to do is observe its victim closely in order to quickly and unerringly adapt to the necessary material structure. I would point out that it's not an illusion, but a complete, precise transformation to the minutest detail. How a mimic does it, no one knows. Sorcerers suspect the same component of the blood is at work here as with lycanthropy, but I think it's either something totally different or 1,000-fold more powerful. After all, a werewolf has only 2, at most 3 different forms, while a doppler can transform into anything it wants to, as long as the body mass more or less tallies."
"Body mass?"
"Well, it won't turn into a mastodon or a mouse."
"Oh, I understand. And the chain you've bound him up in, what's that about?"
"It's silver. It's lethal to a lycanthrope, but as you see, for a mimic, it merely stops the transmutations. That's why it's sitting here in its own form."
The doppler pursed its glutinous lips and glowered at the Witcher with an evil expression in its dull eyes, which had already lost the hazel colour of the halfling's irises and were now yellow.
"I'm glad it's sitting, cheeky bastard," Dainty snarled. "Just to think it even stopped here, at the blade, where I customarily lodge. It already thinks it's me."
Dandelion nodded.
"Dainty," he said, "it was you. I've been meeting it here for 3 days now. It looked like you and spoke like you, and when it came to standing around, it was as tight as you, possibly even tighter." "That last point doesn't worry me," the halfling said, "because perhaps I'll recover some of my money. It disgusts me to touch it. Take the purse of it, Dandelion, and check what's inside. There ought to be plenty if that horse thief really did sell my nags."
"How many horses did you have, Dainty?"
"A dozen."
"Calculating according to world prices," the troubadour said, looking into the purse, "what's here would just about buy a single horse if you chanced upon an old foundered one. Calculated according to Novigradian prices, there's enough for 2 goats, 3 at most." The merchant said nothing, but looked as though he were about to cry. Tellico Lungravinkletorte hung his nose down low and his lower lip even lower, after which he began to softly gurgle.
"In a word," the halfling finally sighed, "I've been robbed and ruined by a creature whose existence I previously didn't believe in. That's what you call bad luck."
"That about sums it up," the Witcher said,
casting a glance at the doppler huddled on the stool.
"I was also convinced that mimics had been wiped out long ago. In the past, so I've heard, plenty of them used to live in the nearby forests and on the plateau, but their ability to mimic seriously worried the first settlers, and they began to hunt them, quite effectively. Almost all of them were quickly exterminated."
"And lucky for us,"
the innkeeper said, spitting onto the floor.
"I swear on the eternal fire I prefer a dragon or a demon, which is always a dragon or a demon. You know where you are with them. But werewolfery, all those transmutations and metamorphoses, that hideous demonic practice, trickery, and the treacherous deceit conjured up by those hideous creatures will be the detriment and undoing of people. I tell you, let's call the guard and into the fire with this repugnance."
"Geralt," Dandelion asked curiously, "I'd be glad to hear an expert's opinion. Are these mimics really so dangerous and aggressive?"
"Their ability to mimic," the Witcher said, "is an attribute which serves as defence rather than aggression. I haven't heard of—"
"A pox on it,"
Dainty interrupted angrily, slamming his fist down on the table.
"If thumping a fellow in the head and plundering him isn't aggression, I don't know what is. Stop being clever. The matter is simple. I was waylaid and robbed, not just of my hard-earned property, but also of my own form. I demand compensation, and I shall not rest—"
"The guard. We must call the guard," the innkeeper said. "And we should summon the priests and burn that monster, that non-human."
"Give over, landlord," the halfling said, raising his head. "You're becoming a bore with that guard of yours. I would like to point out that that non-human hasn't harmed anybody else, only me. And incidentally, I'm also a non-human."
"Oh, don't be ridiculous, Mr. Beeperfelt," The innkeeper laughed nervously.
What are you, and what is that? You're not far off being a man, and that's a monster. It astonishes me that you're sitting there so calmly, Witcher, sir. What's your trade, if you'll pardon me? It's your job to kill monsters, isn't it?
Monsters, Geralt said coldly, but not the members of intelligent races.
Come, sir, the innkeeper said. That's a bit of an exaggeration.
Indeed, Dandelion cut in. You've overstepped the mark, Geralt, with that intelligent race. Just take a look at it. Tellico Lungravinkler Torta, indeed, did not resemble a member of an intelligent race at that moment. He resembled a puppet made of mud and flour, looking at the Witcher with a beseeching look in its dull yellow eyes. Neither were the snuffling sounds being emitted from its nose, which now reached the table, consistent with a member of an intelligent race.
Enough of this empty bullshit, Dainty Bibivelt suddenly roared. There's nothing to argue about. The only thing that counts is my horses and my loss. Do you hear, you bloody slippery jack, you? Who did you sell my nags to? What did you do with the money? Tell me now before I kick you black and blue and flay you alive.
Detchka, opening the door slightly, stuck her flaxen-haired head into the chamber.
We have visitors, father, she whispered. Journeyman masons from the scaffolding and others. I'm serving them, but don't shout so loudly in here, because they're beginning to look funny at the snog.
By the eternal fire,
the innkeeper said in horror, looking at the molten Doppler.
If someone looks in and sees it, it'll look bad. If we aren't to call the guard, then... Witcher, sir? If it really is a vexling, tell it to change into something decent, as a disguise, like. Just for now. That's right, Dainty said. Have him change into something, Geralt.
Into whom?
The Doppler suddenly gurgled.
I can only take on a form I've had a good look at. Which of you shall I turn into?
Not me,
the innkeeper said hurriedly.
Nor me,
Dandelion snorted.
Anyway, it wouldn't be any disguise. Everybody knows me, so the sight of two dandelions at one table would cause a bigger sensation than the one here in person.
It will be the same with me, Geralt smiled. That leaves you, Dainty. And it's turned out well. Don't be offended, but you know yourself that people have difficulty distinguishing one halfling from another. The merchant did not ponder this for long.
Very well, he said. Let it be. Take the chain off him, Witcher. Right then, turn yourself into me, oh intelligent race.
After the chain had been removed, the Doppler rubbed its doughy hands together, felt its nose, and stared goggle-eyed at the halfling. The sagging skin on its face tightened up and acquired colour. Its nose shrank and drew in with a dull, squelching sound, and curly hair sprouted on its bald pate. Now it was Dainty's turn to goggle. The innkeeper opened his mouth in mute astonishment, and Dandelion heaved a sigh and groaned. The last thing to change was the colour of its eyes. The second Dainty Bibivelt cleared its throat, reached across the table, seized the first Dainty Bibivelt's beer mug, and greedily pressed its mouth to it.
It can't be. It can't be, Dandelion said softly. Just look. He's been copied exactly. They're indistinguishable, down to the last detail. This time even the mosquito bites and stains on its breeches. Yes, on its breeches. Geralt, not even sorcerers can manage that. Feel it, it's real wool. Well, that's no illusion. Extraordinary. How does it do it?
No one knows, the Witcher muttered. It doesn't either. I said it has the complete ability for the free transformation of material structure, but it is an organic, instinctive ability.
But the breeches? What has it made the breeches out of? And the waistcoat?
That's its own adapted skin. I don't think it'd be happy to give up those trousers. Anyway, they'd immediately lose the properties of wool.
Pity, Dainty said, showing cunning, because I was just wondering whether to make it change a bucket of matter into a bucket of gold.
The Doppler, now a faithful copy of the halfling, lounged comfortably and grinned broadly, clearly glad to be the centre of interest. It was sitting in an identical pose to Dainty, swinging its hairy feet the same way.
You know plenty about Dopplers, Geralt, it said,
then took a swig from the mug, smacked its lips, and belched.
Plenty indeed. Ye gods! Its voice and mannerisms are also Bibivelt's, Dandelion said. Haven't any of you got a bit of red silk thread? We ought to mark it, damn it, because there might be trouble.
Come on, Dandelion, the first dainty Bibelveld said indignantly. Surely you won't mistake it for me. The differences are clear at first glance.
The second dainty Bibelveld completed the sentence and belched again gracefully.
Indeed, in order to be mistaken, you'd have to be more stupid than a mare's arse.
Didn't I say? Dandelion whispered in amazement. It thinks and talks like Bibelveld. They're indistinguishable.
An exaggeration, the halfling said, pouting. A gross exaggeration.
No, Geralt rebutted. It's not an exaggeration. Believe it or not, but at this moment, it is you, Dainty. In some unknown way, the Doppler also precisely copies its victim's mentality.
Mental what?
The mind's properties, the character, feelings, thoughts, the soul, which would confirm what most sorcerers and old priests would deny, that the soul is also matter. Blasphemy! The innkeeper gasped.
And poppycock, Dainty Bibelveld said firmly. Don't tell stories, Witcher. The mind's properties, I like that. Copying someone's nose and breeches is one thing, but someone's mind is no bloody mean feat. I'll prove it to you now. If that lousy Doppler had copied my merchant's mind, he wouldn't have sold the horses in Novigrad, where there's no market for them. He would have ridden to the horse fair in Devil's Ford, where they're sold to the highest bidder. You don't lose money there. Well, actually, you do.
The Doppler imitated the halfling's offended expression and snorted characteristically.
First of all, the prices at the auction in Devil's Ford are coming down because the merchants are fixing the bidding. And, in addition, you have to pay the auctioneer's commission. Don't teach me how to trade, you prat, Bibelveld said indignantly. I would have taken 90 or 100 apiece in Devil's Ford, and how much did you get off those Novigradian chances? 130, the Doppler replied. You're lying, you rascal. I am not. I drove the horses straight to the port, sir, and found a foreign fur trader. Furriers don't use oxen when they assemble their caravans because oxen are too slow. Furs are light but costly, so one needs to travel swiftly. There's no market for horses in Novigrad, so neither are there any horses. I had the only available ones, so I could name my price. Simple. Don't teach me, I said, Dainty yelled, flushing red. Very well. You made a killing, so where's the money? I reinvested it, Tellico said proudly, imitating the halfling's typical raking of his fingers through his thick mop of hair. Money, Mr. Dainty, has to circulate, and business has to be kept moving. Be careful I don't wring your neck. Tell me what you did with the cash you made on the horses. I told you. I sank it into goods. What goods? What did you buy, you freak? Cochineal, the Doppler stuttered, and then enumerated quickly. 1,000 bushels of cochineal, 6,200 weight of mimosa bark, 55 gallons of rose oil, 23 barrels of cod liver oil, 600 earthenware bowls, and 80 pounds of beeswax. I bought the cod liver oil very cheaply, incidentally, because it was a little rancid. Oh, yes, I almost forgot. I also bought 100 cubits of cotton string.
A long, very long silence fell.
Cod liver oil?
Dainty finally said, enunciating each word very slowly.
Cotton string? Rose oil. I must be dreaming. Yes, it's a nightmare. You can buy anything in Novigrad, every precious and everyday thing, and this moron here spends my money on shit, pretending to be me. I'm finished. My money's lost. My merchant's reputation is lost. No, I've had enough of this. Lend me your sword, Geralt. I'll cut into shreds here and now.
The door to the chamber creaked open. The merchant Bibelveld, crowed an individual in a purple toga, which hung on his emaciated frame as though on a stick. He had a hat on his head, shaped like an upturned chamber pot. Is the merchant Bibelveld here?
Yes,
the two halflings answered in unison. The next moment, one of the dainty Bibelvelds flung the contents of the mug in the witcher's face, deftly kicked the stool from under Dandelion, and slipped under the table towards the door, knocking over the individual in the ridiculous hat on the way.
Fire! Help!
It yelled, rushing out towards the common chamber.
Murder! Calamity!
Geralt, shaking off the beer froth, rushed after him, but the second Bibelveld, who was also tearing towards the door, slipped on the sawdust and fell in front of him. The two of them fell over right on the threshold. Dandelion, clambering out from under the table, cursed hideously. "Assault!"
yelled the skinny individual entangled in his purple toga from the floor. "Robbery! Criminals!" Geralt rolled over the halfling and rushed into the main chamber to see the doppler, jostling the drinkers, running out into the street. He rushed after him, only to run into a resilient but hard wall of men barring his way. He managed to knock one of them over, smeared with clay and stinking of beer, but others held him fast in the iron grip of powerful hands. He fought furiously, but heard the dry report of snapping thread and rending leather, and the sleeve become loose under his right armpit. The Witcher swore and stopped struggling.
"We have him," the masons yelled. "We've got the robber. What do we do now, master?" "Lime," the master bellowed, raising his head from the table and looking around with unseeing eyes.
"God!" the purple one yelled, crawling from the chamber on all fours. "An official has been assaulted. God, it will be the gallows for you, villain."
"We have him," the masons shouted. "We have him, sir."
"That's not him," the individual in the toga bellowed. "Catch the scoundrel! After him!"
"Who?"
"Biebervelt the halfling! After him! Give chase to the dungeons with him!"
"Hold on a moment," Dainty said, emerging from the snug. "What's it all about, Mr. Schwan? Don't drag my name through the mud, and don't sound the alarm. There's no need."
Schwan was silent and looked at the halfling in astonishment. Dandelion emerged from the chamber, bonnet at an angle, examining his loot. The masons, whispering among themselves, finally released Geralt. The Witcher, although absolutely furious, limited himself to spitting copiously on the floor. "Merchant Bieberveld," Schwan crowed, narrowing his myopic eyes. "What is the meaning of this? An assault on a municipal official may cost you dearly." "Who was that halfling who bolted?"
"My cousin," Dainty said quickly. A distant cousin."
Yes, yes," Dandelion agreed, swiftly backing him up and feeling in his element. "Bieberveld's distant cousin, known as Nutcase Bieberveld, the black sheep of the family. When he was a child, he fell into a well, a dried-up well, but unfortunately the pail hit him directly on his head. He's usually peaceful. It's just that the colour purple infuriates him. But there's nothing to worry about, because he's calmed by the sight of red hairs on a lady's loins. That's why he rushed straight to Passiflora. I tell you, Mr. Schwan."
"That's enough, Dandelion," the Witcher hissed. "Shut up, damn it."
Schwan pulled his toga down, brushed the sawdust off it, and straightened up, assuming a haughty air. "Now then," he said, "heed your relatives more attentively, Merchant Bieberveld, because, as you well know, you are responsible. Were I to lodge a complaint... But I cannot afford the time. I am here, Bieberveld, on official business. On behalf of the municipal authorities, I summon you to pay tax."
"Hey?"
"Tax," the official repeated, and pouted his lips in a grimace probably copied from someone much more important. "What are you doing? Been infected by your cousin? If you make a profit, you have to pay taxes, or you'll have to do time in the dungeon."
"Me?"
Dainty roared.
"Me? Make a profit? All I have is losses, for fuck's sake."
"Careful, Bieberveld," the Witcher hissed,
while Dandelion kicked the halfling furtively in his hairy shin. The halfling coughed.
"Of course,"
he said, struggling to put a smile on his chubby face.
"Of course, Mr. Schwan. If you make a profit, you have to pay taxes. High profits, high taxes. And the other way round, I'd say."
"It is not for me to judge your business, sir," the official said, making a sour face. He sat down at the table, removing from the fathomless depths of his toga an abacus and a scroll of parchment, which he unrolled on the table, first wiping it with a sleeve. "It is my job to count up and collect. Now then, let us reckon this up. That will be 2 down, carry the 1. Now then, 1,553 crowns and 20 pennies. A hushed wheeze escaped Dainty Bieberveld's lips. The masons muttered in astonishment. The innkeeper dropped a bowl. Dandelion gasped.
"Very well. Goodbye, lads," the halfling said bitterly. "If anybody asks, I'm in the dungeon."